that has enough rainfall, it's that process from bare soil to fields to shrubs to trees, or wherever nature's going. Agriculture is the process of setting that back to the field stage, to meadows, which is a very early successionary stage that actually turns out to be ecologically, well, energetically pretty poor compared to what a forest can do, or a more mature ecosystem. So horticulture lets that succession happen. It's working with nature rather than against it. Ecosystems still get to function in horticultural systems. I went to what was called a farm in Central America, where the guy took me out and he showed me his little plot of corn out there that was enough for his family and enough to take some to market. But it was a half acre of corn or so. And I looked around and he said, so this is my farm, and I looked around and it was a jungle. I mean, a jaguar had walked right past his house the night before, and it was this amazing jungle that was beautiful, but I just didn't understand it. And then I looked around and realized, wait, that's a mango tree, that's a tamarind, that's a coconut, that's citrus, those are bananas, that's a cacao tree, a chocolate tree with a vanilla bean twining up it. And those are medicinal plants. And realizing that I was in the middle of this incredible food forest that still functioned like a natural ecosystem. I mean, it had jaguars and wild eagles and all sorts of stuff still in it. So that's another aspect of horticulture. There's less hierarchy in horticultural societies. Like I said, you can usually talk to the head person rather than running into the Secret Service if you get too close to them. And a big difference, this was kind of a weird one, but when I started teaching permaculture courses, I noticed that a lot of my students, although they may have come from a background similar to mine, I was raised Episcopalian, I went to church as a kid all the time, and it seemed like all the time, and a lot of my students were from the same background, a Judeo-Christian type of background, but they currently had more of a kind of what I would call an earth worshiper approach. They were kind of Wiccan or pagan or just more earth spirits. And I kept wondering, why are so many of these students like they're worshiping an earth goddess rather than the God that so many of us were raised to worship as kids? And as I learned about forager societies and horticultural societies, it turns out that agricultural societies tend to put their God somewhere up in the sky. And horticultural and forager societies put their God in the earth or in the things right around us. That the spirits are in animals, in plants, in the rivers, in the soil. And I thought, so maybe what I'm seeing is people who are somehow trying to come back to that forager or horticultural society as opposed to agriculture. They're looking at something different. That was really what got me thinking about this whole thing, was why are so many of my students worshiping an earth goddess? Why is that happening? Culture doesn't require agriculture. That's really the point of what I'm trying to say, is they're two different things. There was a really important paper, very controversial, that came out in the 1960s called The Original Affluent Society, that showed how little work hunter-gatherer cultures do to stay alive. They have a huge amount of free time where they just sit around hanging out. They go out and do their work for about 3 hours a day, and then they come back and they sit around and talk or have fun together. And they also have all the things that we think of as culture. They've got music, they've got art, they've got crafts, they've got good shelter, they have rituals, they have community, they have religion, they have all these things. There's very little that you miss when you're not doing agriculture, except maybe things like famine and soil loss and stuff like that. And a very short work day, a lot of leisure time. So I think that what we're trying to do is that ball of yarn that was mostly purple and then a little bit of blue, what's the next color going to be? It's probably not going to be purple, because we don't go back, right? Human beings just don't do that very often. We keep finding new things to do. So I'm really wondering what that next color is going to look like. And what we're trying to do is figure out a way to live on this planet and share it with all the other creatures that are here with us. And I want to give some examples of what permaculture, which I think is kind of the same as a horticultural society, except it picks some of the great things from agriculture and leaves some of the not so good things behind. It picks great things from industrial culture and leaves some of the not so good things behind. One of permaculture's principles, which we observe nature in permaculture, and we see how life is working. Because if life's been around for as long as it has been, it's probably pretty sustainable. We also look at indigenous cultures that have lived in the same place for thousands of years, because they probably got it figured out as well. And we try and figure out what they're doing. And one of the things that they're doing is to make really good connections among things, that they think, that we try to think in terms of relationships rather than stuff. And so this is a picture that to me exemplifies really good connections. It's an earthen chicken coop that a friend of mine built, and when I look at this as a chicken house, I think when I got out of school, I think I lived in places that were not as nice as this. I mean, it's got a nice sliding glass door. It's a pretty sweet place, really. But this is owned by a guy named Jerome Osentowski, who lives in Basalt, Colorado, which is outside of Aspen. He lives on a hillside in the mountains, so he doesn't have much flat ground. So he built his chicken yard on the slope because he figured he wants his flat ground to grow food on, and the chickens didn't mind the hillside. And then he realized that if he's got all this spoiled hay, because there are a lot of ranchers around, and spoiled hay is a really common resource there. It rains in the afternoon and the hay starts to spoil, so there's tons of it. So he takes a bale of spoiled hay, which doesn't have a lot of use except maybe compost. If you've ever made the mistake of mulching your garden with spoiled hay or with hay, it's got all the grass seeds in it, you're essentially planting a lawn. I only did that once and learned from that. He takes a bale of spoiled hay, cuts the strings, drops it in the top of the chicken yard. The chickens come running over to see this new thing in their yard, and they start kicking at it and knocking it apart. They start eating all the seeds out of it, because they like to eat the seeds. They eat weed seeds and grass seeds out of it, kick it all around, and that keeps them busy. They're happy chickens because they got something to do. It's bedding in their yard, and they spread it around rather than Jerome spreading it around. The other thing they do is they poop into it. So, right, chicken manure is great stuff. So by the time this spoiled hay has worked its way down to the bottom of the slope, it's had all the weed seeds and grass seeds picked out of it by the chickens, and it's full of chicken manure. So Jerome has a little gate at the bottom of his chicken yard, and he opens this up and pulls this beautiful mulch loaded with fertilizer and puts it on his garden, which is also right next door, really, really close. So by putting the spoiled hay and the chickens and the slope and his garden all in the right relationship, he's growing chickens, and he's got this incredible fertilized mulch that he can use. So this, to me, I mean, I wish I was smart enough to think of stuff like this. He's a lazy guy, and he comes up with these brilliant solutions. Putting things in the right place, creating good relationships between them. Another permaculture principle is to make the least change for the greatest effect. And there are lots of different ways to do this, but one of my favorite examples is this was an intersection in Portland where I live that a lot of people would cut through because it's near two busy streets, and they'd cut through the residential intersection to get around the busy streets. The neighbors there got sick of it. They went to the city and said, can we get a traffic circle? And they said, traffic circles cost $10,000, come up with the money, or if someone gets killed at the intersection, we will put in a traffic circle. That was the city's policy at that time. So they came up with the idea, and they got a permit for a block party from the city, and they sort of told the city what they were going to do, but not really. They painted the intersection with this incredible sunflower pattern, and they put up a little information kiosk at one corner and a children's playhouse at another corner, and it was actually a thermos chained to a post with a table on it that the neighbor would keep hot water in every morning so people could come by and have tea. And so at each corner, and then a free box in a library of books that people were giving away at the other corner. So that was all they did, was paint the intersection and put something that kind of like turned the intersection into a village. Cars that would come down the street would see this, there'd be people standing all around, all the neighbors would be out talking to one another because it was a wonderful place now. Instead of just an intersection, cars would slow down. So it changed the feel of the neighborhood just by having this block party and painting and building a couple things on the corner. And Portland and a lot of other cities now have something called the intersection repair ordinance, where you can actually get the city's permission to do this in an intersection. And this is what happens when you do something like that. A party breaks out, and then everybody wants to do other projects in the same intersection. So here is a trellis built by a local artist that mimics the sunflower pattern. Here's a mosaic being put on an old concrete wall by a group of school children. and there are now benches that people have put out on their parking strip for folks to sit at, and everybody in the neighborhood has gotten to know one another because of this little change that went on one weekend. Another one, and I'll try and go through this quickly because I can see we're getting close to the end, is whatever energies and materials are going by, and there's